Prologue. It's Friday morning, 8 a.m. A key turns in the front door lock of my Los Angeles home. Maria del Carmen Perez, who cleans my house every week, opens the door. She walks into the kitchen. This early in the morning, I'm usually in a frenzy to get out the door and rush to my office at the LA Times newspaper. But on days when Carmen arrives, I shift gears. I loiter in the kitchen with her and we talk. On this morning in 1997, Carmen and I lean on the opposite sides of the kitchen island. There's a question, she says, that she's been itching to ask. Mrs. Sonia, are you ever going to have a baby? I'm not sure, I tell her. Carmen has a young son she sometimes brings to watch television while she works. Does she want more children, I ask? Carmen, always laughing and chatty, is suddenly silent. She stares awkwardly down at the kitchen counter. Then, quietly, she tells me about 4 other children I never knew existed. These children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, are far away. Carmen says in Guatemala. She left them there when she set out for the United States to work. She's been separated from them for 12 years. Her youngest daughter, Carmen says, was just a year old when she left. She has experienced her oldest boy, Minor, growing up by hearing his voice deepen with age. As Carmen unfolds the story, she begins to sob. 12 years! I react with disbelief. What drove her to travel 2,000 miles away from her children, not knowing when or if she would ever see them again? Carmen dries her tears and explains. Her husband left her and the children for another woman. As hard as she worked, she still couldn't earn enough to feed 4 children on her own. They would ask me for food, and I didn't have it. Many nights they went to bed without dinner. She tried to quiet their hunger pangs as she lulled them to sleep. Sleep face down so your stomach won't growl so much, Carmen would say, gently coaxing them to turn over. Carmen, concerned that I might disapprove of her choice, tells me that many immigrant women in Los Angeles from Central America or Mexico are just like her, single mothers who left children behind in their home countries. I start to understand the depths of desperation women face in countries such as hers. In Honduras, for example, most earn between $40 and $120 a month, working in a factory, cleaning houses, or providing childcare. But a hut with no bathroom or kitchen rents for nearly $30 a month. Mothers must send their children to school in threadbare uniforms and are often unable to afford pencils or paper or buy a decent lunch. A Tegucigalpa elementary school principal told me that many of his students were so malnourished they didn't have the stamina to stand up to sing the national anthem. Many Honduran mothers pull their children out of school when they are as young as 8. They have them babysit their younger siblings while they work or sell tortillas on a street corner. Carmen left for the U.S. out of love. She hoped she could make enough money here and send it back home to provide her children with an escape from the grinding poverty she herself grew up with. She wanted to give them a chance to attend school past the 6th grade. She proudly tells me about the clothes, money, and photos she sends them. She also acknowledges the brutal trade-offs she has had to make. She feels the distance between herself and her children when they speak on the phone. As the day goes by, she misses important milestones in their lives. Her absence leaves deep wounds. When her oldest daughter gets her first period, she's frightened. She doesn't understand what is happening to her body. Why, the girl asked Carmen, were you not here to explain to me? Her children's friends in Guatemala envy the money and presents Carmen sends. You have it all. Good clothes, good tennis shoes, they say. Her son Minor answers, I would trade it all for my mother. I never had someone to spoil me, to say, do this, don't do that, have you eaten? You can never get the love of a mother from someone else. Among Latinos, family is all important. For women, motherhood is valued far above all else. I was struck by the choice mothers face when they leave their children. How do they make such an impossible decision? What would I do if I were in their shoes? Would I come to the United States, make much more money, and ensure that my children back home could eat and study past the 3rd grade? Or would I stay with my children, even though they would then grow up in miserable poverty? Left behind. A smuggler could sneak Carmen's children over the borders from Central America into Mexico, and then from Mexico into the U.S. But Carmen hasn't been able to save enough to pay for a smuggler. Besides, she's afraid to put her children through the dangerous, illegal journey. Carmen was robbed by her smuggler when she trekked north in 1985. She went without food for 3 days. She knows it could have been worse, though. Her daughters, she fears, could get raped along the way. In 1998, the year after Carmen tells me about her family, her son Minor sets off alone to the U.S. to find his mother. He doesn't tell Carmen he's coming. He hitchhikes through Guatemala and Mexico, begging for food along the way. He was 10 years old when she left. He shows up on her doorstep in Los Angeles 13 years later. He has missed his mother intensely. He had to know. Did she leave Guatemala because she never truly loved him? How else could he explain why she left? Minor tells me about his perilous journey hitchhiking. He was robbed and threatened. Still, he says, he was lucky. Each year, thousands of children going to find their mothers in the U.S. travel in a much more dangerous way. The children make the journey riding on top of Mexico's freight trains. They call it El Tren de la Muerte, the train of death. As he speaks, I'm amazed by the dangerous journey these children make to try to be with their mothers. What kind of desperation, I wonder, pushes children as young as 7 years old to set out alone through such a hostile landscape with nothing but their wits? Immigration into the U.S. The United States has experienced the largest wave of immigration in its history. Since 1990, more than 11 million immigrants arrived illegally. Since 2000, a million additional immigrants arrive annually. On average, have arrived legally or become legal residents. This wave of immigration differs in one respect at least from those of the past. Before, when a parent came to the U.S., usually it was the father. The children were left behind with their mothers. But in recent decades, more divorces and separations in Latin America have left many single mothers with no income from the children's fathers and struggling on what they make to raise and feed their kids. In large numbers, these single mothers decide to leave their children with grandparents, relatives, or neighbors to work in the U.S. and send home whatever money they can to help their children have a better life. As Carmen assured me, her experience is incredibly common. In LA, a University of Southern California study showed 82% of live-in nannies and 1 in 4 house cleaners are mothers who still have at least one child in their home country. In much of the U.S., legitimate concerns about immigration and anti-immigrant measures have had a severe side effect. Immigrants have been dehumanized and demonized. Perhaps, I thought, if I provided an in-depth look at one immigrant, his strengths, his courage, his flaws, his humanity might help shed light on what too often has been a black and white discussion. I thought I understood the immigrant experience. My father, Mahfoud, was born in Argentina after his Christian family fled religious persecution in Syria. My mother, Clara, born in Poland, emigrated to Argentina as a young girl to flee poverty and the persecution of Jews. Many of her Polish relatives were gassed during World War II. My family immigrated to the U.S. in 1960. They wanted to leave Argentina, a country controlled by the military, where expression was limited. Through my parents' experience, I understood the desire for opportunity, for freedom. I also understood what it is like to struggle without money. Growing up as the child of Argentine immigrants in the 60s and 70s Kansas, I often felt like an outsider, straddling two countries, two worlds. On many levels, I relate to the experiences of immigrants and Latinos in this country. Still, my parents arrived in the U.S. on an airplane, not on top of a freight train. My family was never separated during the process of immigrating to the U.S. Until my journey with migrant children, I had no true understanding of what people are willing to do to get here to have that same opportunity and freedom.